My name is Amina. Once upon a time, I was a little girl who believed that the stars heard the wishes whispered in the darkness. I grew up among the golden sands of a small town in Saudi Arabia, where the desert seemed to never end and time passed with the constant sound of the call to prayer. That voice that pierced the silence, 5 times a day, was like an invisible seam between us and the presence of Allah, always there, watching, guiding, judging. At 14, my childhood slipped through my fingers, wrapped in a black abaya, sealed by a contract that turned a stranger into my jailer. This is the story I carry in my heart, unfiltered, undisguised. I learned early on that in a man's world, a girl's dreams are dust in the wind. I was born in a house with cracks in the walls and a courtyard where date palms bent under the dry wind. There, tradition was law. Men walked with their heads held high, masters of speech and space, and women moved silently, like shadows behind veils. My father was the pillar of the house, rough hands, an impenetrable face, a voice that could not be argued with. My mother, with eyes tired from so much obedience, taught me to pray, cook, and keep my eyes down when a man spoke. I had 2 younger sisters, Layla and Sarah. Sometimes we would forget about the outside world and run around the yard, inventing stories about warrior princesses who crossed deserts on fast horses. But deep down, even when we were little, we knew that was just a fabrication. In our reality, princesses didn't exist, only brides, and those arrived early. School was my only respite, a simple building with peeling walls, where the girls sat in rows, all covered, learning to add, to read, to be silent. There I felt alive. There was a teacher, Miss Fatima, who had a smile that seemed to open the sky. When she read my texts, her eyes would shine. "Amina," she would say, "you have the soul of a teacher. You can teach other girls like you." And those words, those words, took root in me. I began to dream of a blackboard, of a room full of female voices learning to make themselves heard. Every night, I climbed to the roof and hugged my books like shields. I looked up at the stars and whispered secrets that only they could hear. "One day, I will be free," I whispered, afraid the world would hear me and pull me back. "One day, I will be someone." But here, where I was born, freedom was a luxury reserved for boys. For girls, there were veils, silence, and arranged marriages. It was one random afternoon that everything changed. The air in the living room was heavy with the scent of cardamom tea, and the ceiling fan creaked as if it knew what was coming. My father called me over, serious. My mother was sitting in a corner, fiddling with the edges of her hijab, her eyes sunk to the floor. My father held his teacup tightly, his eyes fixed on nothing. "Amina," he said dryly, "you're going to marry Khaled next week. He's a good man, he has a shop, he has an income, he'll take care of you." The words fell like stones into my chest. Khaled, that man with the graying beard, the harsh laugh, and the eyes that pierced you like blades. I knew him. He had come to our house before. He never looked at me like a person. He looked at me like possession. At that moment, I realized my dreams, no matter how loudly I had shouted them to the heavens, had never been heard. He was 35, older than my father. His hands were like blocks of stone, too big, too rough, too frightening. And I was just a girl, still with the slight body of childhood, my chest full of simple dreams, a blackboard, a classroom, the starry sky above me. "Baba, please." My voice came out small, trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Let me finish school. I want to be a teacher." His face closed in an instant. His eyes narrowed as if my plea was an affront. "Enough, Amina," he said, his voice hard as stone. "This is the will of Allah." He recited Surah 434 as if it were a sentence, not a directive. Men are responsible for women. And with that, all my dreams turned into disobedience, into sin, into shame, as if wanting a different life was turning my back on God. My mother looked up at that moment, and even without saying anything, her eyes said it all, filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. Her silence broke me more than any scream could. I wanted to run, scream, beg, but my legs wouldn't respond. I was sand crumbling inside, and in that world, a girl's voice was no match for a man's will. I was 14 years old, and that day, my life stopped being mine. The next few days passed like a bad dream, a blur of fear, silence, and resignation. At the market, my mother took me to choose Nika's dress. a green satin dress embroidered with gold threads that glittered like empty promises. The market was abuzz with noise, voices, laughter, coins clinking, but it all sounded muffled to my ears, as if I were drowning in an aquarium of despair. The women in the shop surrounded me, pinching my cheeks, smiling as if this were a celebration. "Mabruk, Amina, how lucky you are to marry a good man." They adjusted my dress, spoke excitedly, but none of them really looked me in the eye. Did they see the fear embedded in my skin, the desperate bird beating in my chest? I wanted to ask, lucky for what? For losing my childhood? For burying my dreams? But I kept quiet. I was learning that silence was armor. Talking hurt more. At home, my aunts came swarming over. Loud laughter, quick hands, full of advice and enthusiasm. They sat me down on a bench in the courtyard and began painting my hands with henna. Beautiful, intricate patterns, but they wrapped around me like chains. The strong smell of the paint made me sick, and I stared at the drawings wondering if they were a map of a prison. Aunt Noire, her skin lined with years and submission, stroked my hair tenderly and said, "This is your duty, Amina. A woman's honor lies in her obedience. You will make us proud." She wanted to comfort me, but all I felt was a crushing weight. I wanted to ask why my honor had to cost me my dreams, why pride had to mean submission, but all I did was nod. The lump in my throat wouldn't let me speak, and my eyes burned with tears I wouldn't let fall. My sisters, Layla and Sarah, were watching me from the corner. They were small, 12 and 10, but they weren't blind. They didn't know exactly what was happening, but they could feel it. They could feel something breaking. I wanted to run to them, to say, "Dream. Please dream big. Don't let anyone take that away from you." But I said nothing. The fear was too much. The night before the wedding, sleep would not come. That night, I lay down on the narrow mattress I shared with my sisters. Layla and Sarah slept, their calm breathing filling the room with a rhythm that broke my heart. Outside, the city hummed softly, but it seemed as distant as the sky that had abandoned me. The stars, once accomplices of my dreams, were hidden by thick clouds, and I felt their absence like a betrayal. I thought of Miss Fatima, of her soft smile, of the hope she saw in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. I thought of my notebooks, neatly stacked in a corner of my room, full of my handwriting, my thoughts, my dreams. I wanted to run away, to run to school and hide in the classroom, to huddle between the desks and beg, almost like a child, for her to save me. But no one saves girls like I do. Not teachers, not books, not tears. All the faces around me, my father, the imam, even the Quran he recited so firmly, said the same thing. My place was with Khaled. To want another life was heresy, rebellion, an offense against the will of Allah. I buried my face in the pillow, my tears soaking the fabric until it was like a puddle. "Please, Allah," I whispered, "don't let this be my life." But what came back was a cold silence, as cold as the desert nights when the wind stops blowing. The wedding day arrived like a fever dream. The desert heat enveloped everything, and the courtyard of our house had been transformed into a spectacle. Twinkling lights hung from clotheslines like tired stars, slowly dying. Women passed by me, touching me, adjusting my green dress, the same satin one, embroidered with gold thread, and fastening my veil. Their gestures were firm, almost automatic. I sat in a cushioned chair, my face hidden by layers of cloth that seemed to weigh tons. The veil muffled my breathing. My fingers trembled in my lap, the dark henna etched on my pale skin, like marks of something I hadn't chosen. I felt small, like a doll someone had set up for a story that wasn't mine. In the other room, the men were gathered. Deep voices filled the house as they signed the marriage contract. My father, Khaled, the imam, men who decided my fate without looking me in the eye. My dowry, 10,000 riyals and a gold necklace, the price of my life, but no one asked if I wanted it. No one asked if I was afraid. I was just a signed piece of paper, a wrapped gift, an interpreted verse. My mother stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder, but it wasn't affection. It was restraint, as if she was afraid I would run away. When the men clapped and the women let out their high-pitched cheers, it hurt my ears. I felt like I was drowning in their joy. After the ceremony, the women led me to the car. The veil was still covering my face. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I took a small bag of clothes with me. My school books were left behind, piled up in my childhood bedroom, like a tomb of what I had been. Khaled's house was nearby, but it felt like another planet. A gray building with high walls and barred windows. A fortress. A place made for imprisonment, not for living. When I walked in, I could smell the smell of oud and tobacco. The smell of it. I felt sick. He led me into the bedroom. His hand was firm on my arm, his eyes like closed windows. The bed was there, in front of me, white, immaculate, cold. "You are my wife now," he said, his voice low but full of possession. He took up the entire space. I huddled in the corner, my body still childish, unprepared, confused. I didn't know what marriage meant, but that night, I learned. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about tenderness. It was about power, about heavy hands, about rights taken without question. I closed my eyes, trying to remember the stars, the open sky, the promises I whispered when I was still free. But there, locked between four walls, the stars had disappeared, and my body learned, in the silence of tears, what it means to be a wife in a world where women are taught to be silent. The days that followed were like a heavy fog. Everything seemed blurry, muffled, as if I were living inside a sad dream from which I could not wake up. Every morning I opened my eyes with a stone on my chest, something invisible, but slowly crushing me. I would rise before the sun, in silence, to prepare Khaled's breakfast, fresh pita bread and lob, just the way he liked it. My hands moved on their own, following a routine that didn't belong to me. My mind, however, wandered far away, to places where I was still just a girl, dreaming of chalkboards and open notebooks. I spent the day cleaning the house, sweeping every corner as if maybe, after all this, I would deserve some kind of acceptance. Khaled was kind sometimes. He would come by with candy from the store, or pat my head, like you would pet a pet. But his kindness was never freedom. It was a leash disguised as care, a reminder that I was his. He would spend his afternoons in the living room, reading the newspaper, while I served tea with my eyes downcast, as I had been taught. "You are a good wife, Amina," he would say in a voice that seemed neutral, soulless, as if kindness were synonymous with silence, as if disappearing were a virtue. I missed my mother, the quiet warmth of her hands, the way she made the world seem less cruel, even when it hurt. I missed my sisters and our laughter on the playground, and school, and Miss Fatima's voice echoing through the room, and the sound of chalk scratching on the board. Sometimes I would stand at the window and watch the girls run to school, their backpacks swinging on their backs. I would follow them with my eyes until they disappeared around the corner, and I would touch the glass with my fingertips, as if I could walk through the bars and be one of them again. At night, I would lie down next to Khaled. He would snore heavily, and I, with my eyes open in the darkness, would think of my school books, still stored in my father's house, like relics of a life that no longer belonged to me. I would kneel on the prayer mat and press my forehead to the floor, asking for strength, patience, a reason to carry on. But the words sounded hollow, echoing in the void, as if not even Allah could hear me. The city lived on around me, indifferent. The call to prayer still filled the air 5 times a day, reminding me that God was always present. But I felt invisible, even to him. At the market, the neighbors greeted me with soft smiles, but there was something in their eyes, a silent recognition, a mirror, a pain too old to name. "You'll get used to it," one of them said when I let it slip that I was scared. She spoke sweetly, as if she were consoling me, but I didn't want to get used to it. I didn't want to live as if that were all. I didn't want to be just a wife who cooks, cleans, and gives birth, while her dreams wither like forgotten flowers in the desert. I was 14, and my childhood was already a blurred memory, a veil, a contract, a man who called me his wife. That was what ripped it from me. But even beneath all that pain, even suffocated by fear, there was something inside me. Small, almost imperceptible. A spark. I didn't know it then. But that spark, that fragile glow buried deep inside, would one day turn into a fire, and that fire would burn away the chains that held me captive. For now, I was just a caged girl. My body was there, but my heart was still searching for the stars, the ones I could no longer see. 2 years passed, and then I became a mother. I was no longer the trembling 14-year-old girl clutching notebooks and silent promises to heaven. Now I was 16, and I held my daughter Noor in my arms. I had given her a name that meant light, because I desperately needed something to illuminate this dark world that was slowly swallowing me. Noor was my anchor, my reason. In her newly opened eyes, I saw a spark of what might still be possible. Khalid's house, with its concrete walls and locked windows, was all I knew. It was my entire world, a place where I prayed, cooked, cleaned, and dreamed in silence. My days were marked by the rhythm of the adhan and the duties of being the perfect wife. I had learned to be silent, to bend, to exist without making a sound. But what no one knew was that, within my silence, something was growing. But nothing could prepare me for the day Khalid destroyed what little hope I had left. The day he brought home Illa, his second wife, and turned my heart into a battlefield of pain and betrayal. It was a scorching afternoon, the kind where the air is heavy and suffocating, unforgiving. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of lentil soup, the steam rising in hot clouds that burned my eyes. Noor was dozing in the next room, her small chest rising and falling with the gentle rhythm of sleep, her dark curls spread across the pillow. The house was silent, except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the distant noise of the city outside. Khalid arrived earlier than usual, his heavy footsteps echoing on the cold tile floor. I turned, expecting his usual wave, his order for tea, his gaze that I still sought in vain. But his face was different, radiant, almost childlike, with a smile I hadn't seen since the early days of our marriage. For a moment, my heart filled with foolish joy, hoping he was happy to see me. "Amina," he said, sitting at the small wooden table, his hands folded as if he were about to deliver a sermon. "I am going to marry Illa tomorrow. She is 19 and comes from a good family. Her father has agreed, and the name is set." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, sharp and suddenly violent, knocking the air from my lungs. Illa. I knew her face from the market. Her eyes shone with youth. Her laughter was light and free, so different from mine, so restrained. She was the daughter of a textile merchant, always dressed in colorful abayas, her steps light as if the world had not yet taught her how to carry weight. My hands began to shake, and the wooden spoon slipped from my fingers, falling with a clatter onto the silent kitchen floor. The sound echoed, but Khalid didn't even notice. "Why?" I whispered, my voice so low it seemed to vanish into thin air. His smile disappeared, replaced by a cold, hard look, as if I were a child who had spoken out of turn. "The Quran permits it, Amina," he said, his voice harsh, quoting Surah 43 like a whip. "A man may have up to 4 wives if he can support them. Be grateful that I am supporting you and Noor." He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the boiling pot of soup and my broken heart. Grateful? How could I be grateful when my world was falling apart? I wanted to scream, to run after him, to beg him to choose me, to see me as more than an obligation, but I knew it was useless. In our town, polygamy was as common as the sand blowing through the streets. Men had 2nd, 3rd, even 4th wives, and women were expected to smile, to share their husbands as they shared the air in a cramped room. The imam of the mosque preached that it was the wisdom of Allah that men were created to love many, while women should be loyal to one. I had heard the stories, wives competing for their husband's attention, hearts broken, voices silenced. I never thought it would happen to me. Not so soon. Not when I was so young. I still hoped that Khalid would one day look at me with the same affection he'd shown me in the first few weeks of our marriage. I sank to the floor, my back against the kitchen wall, my abaya pooling around me like spilled paint. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. I thought of Noor, my light, sleeping just inside the door. What kind of life was I giving her? A life where her mother was just one among many, where love was shared like a dry piece of bread. I wanted to protect her, to spare her this pain, but I didn't know how. I was trapped, a bird in a cage with no key, my wings clipped by a faith and a culture that taught me to accept my place. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to compose myself, but the cracks were already there, spreading like lines of broken glass. The next day, Layla's nikah was held at her father's house, a grander affair than mine. Khalid hadn't invited me, and strangely, I was glad. I couldn't bear the thought of her dressed in green, her hands painted with henna, her future shining brightly for her while mine faded. I sat at home, rocking Nori in my arms, singing a lullaby my mother used to sing to me. The words were soft, telling of a girl who danced beneath the moon, but to me they were lies. There was no dancing, no moonlight, just the suffocating weight of knowing I was no longer enough. When Khalid came back that night, he was different, lighter. His eyes shone with a joy that cut deeper than any words could. He didn't talk to me. He didn't look at me. He went straight to the bedroom, and I heard his distant humming, a sound that made my chest tighten. Ila moved in a week later, her suitcases taking up the second bedroom Khalid had prepared. I stood in the doorway, watching her unpack her belongings, bright scarves, embroidered dresses, a bottle of perfume that caught the light. She was beautiful, her skin soft and golden, her movements graceful, in a way I had never been. She smiled at me, shy, nervous, but I couldn't smile back. My heart was too heavy, too raw. Khaled spent his days with her, his laughter echoing through the house, a sound I hadn't heard in years. At night, their voices whispered through the thin walls, soft, intimate, and I huddled next to no one, my tears wetting his blanket. I felt like a discarded toy, no longer wanted, but still expected to serve. I cooked for them, cleaned the house, washed their clothes, my hands moving while my heart screamed silently. I tried to talk to Ila once, hoping to find a friend, a sister in this strange new world. I found her in the kitchen one morning, slicing cucumbers with quick, sure hands. "Lila," he said, his voice shaking, "how do you feel about all this?" She looked at me, eyes wide, and for a moment I thought she would understand, but she looked away, her cheeks flushed. "It is the will of Allah," he replied softly, echoing words I had heard so many times before. "Khaled is a good man. We are lucky." Sort? The word stung, a cruel reminder that she was the favorite, the new wife, while I was the old, the used one. I nodded and walked away, my throat tight, the hope of connection crumbling like dry sand between my fingers. The women in the neighborhood saw my pain, but they didn't comfort me. One day, I went to the market with Nori in my arms and met my neighbor Fatima at the vegetable stand. Her eyes softened when she saw me, but her words were harsh. "It's normal, Amina," she said, picking tomatoes with steady hands. "My husband has 3 wives. Learn to live with it. Be patient, and Allah will reward you." Patient. The word sounded to me like a chain, binding me to a life I did not choose. I wanted to say that I didn't want patience, that I wanted to be seen, to be loved, to be enough, but I just nodded. My lips pressed together and I carried the groceries home. Their weight was nothing compared to the weight pressing down on my chest. At home, he prayed more intensely than ever. His knees hurt from pressing so hard on the prayer rug. I would lay it out in the corner of the room, facing Mecca, and whisper my prayers to Allah. "Please make him love me again," she said, her voice shaking. "Please make me enough." But the silence that responded was deafening, and my doubts only grew. Why did Allah allow this pain? Why was my suffering a test while Khalid's joy seemed like a right? I looked at Nore, sleeping in her crib, and wondered what kind of God would let her mother disappear into the shadows. The Quran said that a man could have up to 4 wives, but it did not teach how to heal a broken heart by sharing love. I felt betrayed, not just by Khalid, but by the faith I had been taught to trust. Noor was my only light in those dark days. I held her tight, her little body warm against mine, and whispered stories about the stars I used to dream about. He promised her a world where girls could be teachers, choose their own paths, a place where love wasn't shared out like a bargain. But even as I spoke, I felt the weight of my lies. How could I promise freedom if I myself was imprisoned? How could I teach her to dream if my own dreams had been destroyed? I kissed her forehead, soft, sweet skin, and prayed that she would never know this pain, never know what it was like to be one of many, invisible in her own home. The house had become a silent but brutal battlefield. Khalid's full attention was on Ila, her laughter, her beauty, her youth. He brought her gifts from the store, silk scarves, bracelets, small gestures that I didn't receive, just his indifference. One night I plucked up the courage to ask, "Khalid," she said in a shaky voice as he ate dinner, "do you still care about me?" He raised his cold eyes and replied, "You are my wife, Amina. I support you. That is enough. Enough." The word was a slap, a cruel reminder that my heart didn't matter, only my obedience. I nodded, cleaning her plate, my hands shaking, my tears hidden behind my veil. The nights were the hardest. She lay awake, listening to the sounds from Ila's room, soft murmurs, the creak of the bed. I pulled Nora close, his warmth the only thing keeping me from breaking down. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, invisible, inaudible. The call to prayer echoed at dawn, pulling me from the haze of insomnia. I dragged myself to the rug, my prayers filled with desperation like never before. But doubts grew inside me, like weeds choking my faith. Was it really Allah's will to let me wallow in this solitude while Khaled built a new life with another woman? Was I destined to live forever in the shadow of a younger, brighter wife? That spark of rebellion that had emerged in me at age 14 still burned, hidden, but alive. I didn't know how to fight it, or how to escape, but I felt that spark stirring inside my chest. It was a silent resistance, a whisper that said, I deserve better. I looked at Noir, her eyes full of innocence, and I swore to protect her. I wanted a different life for her, one where she wasn't just a wife, just a mother, just a shadow. I didn't know how to make that happen, but I clung with all my strength to that tiny flame of hope. It was all I had left, in a world that was closing in on me, an invisible cage of polygamy that trapped my heart and soul. For now, I was still Khaled's first wife, still bound by duty, still praying to a God who seemed to have forgotten me. But that spark was growing, and one day it would pull me out of the darkness. I turned 18, but time didn't make me stronger, it just heavier, as if every day I carried a new stone in my chest. My daughter was barely 2 years old, and the sound of her laughter was the only thing that kept my heart whole, even if only for a short time. Khaled's house, with its cold concrete walls and barred windows, was no longer just a cage. It was a prison, where I learned to fear more than I ever thought possible. Ela, the second wife, dominated the house with her youth and light laughter, while I slowly faded away, invisible in my own life. But it was not only she who destroyed me. It was also Khaled's anger, the blows he sometimes threw at me, and the constant threat, 3 words that froze me. I divorce you. In our world, the man had all the power, and the woman's obedience was his only shield. This is the story of how that shield failed me, how the weight of that obedience broke my spirit, and how my doubts about Allah turned into a storm I could no longer quell. The change in Khaled was slow, like a shadow stretching across the desert at the end of the day. In the early days, he was distant, but there was the occasional kindness, a piece of candy from the store, a touch on my head. After Illa arrived, everything changed. His kindness disappeared, replaced by a temper that flared quickly, like a spark in dry grass. It started with little things, a harsh word if the rice was overcooked, a cold look if I spoke out of turn. I learned to walk quietly, to speak softly, to keep my eyes on the ground. But no matter how hard I tried, it never seemed to be enough. The Quran said that a man had responsibility over a woman, and could discipline her if she disobeyed him. Surah 4:34. Khaled took these words as license, and I became the target of his fury. The first time he hit me, I was in the kitchen washing the dishes after dinner. Noir was asleep, and Ela was in the bedroom, her laughter echoing through the house like a silent taunt. Khaled came home late that night, his face drawn with frustration, grumbling about a bad day at the store. I poured him tea with steady hands, even as my stomach tightened. But he looked at the cup and complained that it was too cold, slamming it down impatiently. "Can't you do anything right, Amina?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. All I could do was mumble an apology and reach for the glass, but before I could reach it, his hand was faster. It connected with my cheek with a sharp slap, a sharp sting that sent me stumbling against the counter. The world spun around me, my face burning, my heart racing. I touched my skin, my fingers trembling, expecting the metallic taste of blood, but all I felt was the heat of pain. "You are my wife," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Allah allows me to correct you. Don't make me repeat it." He walked away, leaving me shaking. The broken glass on the floor reflected what I felt inside, a broken, shattered heart. I didn't cry that night, not because I wasn't hurt, but because the fear was greater than any tears. As I cleaned the kitchen, my hands moved automatically, and his sentence ran through my head. Allah allows me. Was this what God wanted for me? That I should live in terror, fearing the hand of a man? I thought of my mother, her tired eyes, her silence when my father shouted. Had she lived like this too? I remembered the neighbors' hushed stories of husbands disciplining their wives, of bruises hidden beneath veils. "That's how it is," they said, "a test of patience, a path to paradise." But as I swept up the broken glass, I sensed only a trap, not a path. The abuse became routine, as regular as the call to prayer. A wrong word, a meal he didn't like, a look he didn't approve of. Anything could trigger his rage. His hands were quick, his slaps accurate, sometimes leaving marks that I covered with my veil. Once, when I burned the bread, he grabbed my arm so hard that it left deep marks, like claws digging into my skin. "You are useless, Amina," he said, his eyes cold as stone. "Be grateful. I will support you. Grateful." The word was a knife twisting in my chest. I wanted to scream that I was not useless, that I was more than a servant, more than a shadow. But fear silenced my voice. Silence became my armor, thin, fragile, but it was all I had. My worst fear was not the pain of his hands, but divorce. In our town, a man could end a marriage in 3 words: divorce, divorce, divorce. I had heard the whispered stories in the market as women sorted through vegetables. A wife who talked too much, who didn't please her husband, could be thrown out and left with nothing. Divorced women were rejected, their families abandoned, and their children went to their father. I had seen these women before, dressed in worn abayas, begging near the mosque, their eyes hollow and empty of hope. Khaled knew this power, and used it like a sharp sword. "I could divorce you tomorrow," he said, as if speaking of the weather. "You would be nothing without me." Those words hung over me, a dark cloud ready to explode. I had no rights, no voice. The law, the imam, my family, they were all on his side. If he kicked me out, I would lose everything. My daughter Noor, my light, my reason to keep breathing. Fear kept me awake at night. My heart pounded, my prayers more urgent than ever. Ila saw all this, but she never said a word. Sometimes I would catch her watching me, her eyes shining with a mixture of guilt and pity, but she would remain silent. She was the favorite wife. Her room was a universe unto itself, filled with gifts, silk scarves, gold earrings, perfumes that smelled of jasmine. Khalid's laughter followed Ila, while his anger followed me like a shadow. I didn't hate her. Not really. She was trapped too, bound by the same rules, the same faith. But her presence only made my pain more acute, a cruel reminder that I was no longer enough. I tried to talk to her once, one night when Khalid was in the store. "Doesn't it hurt to share him?" I asked, almost in a whisper. She looked at me, eyes wide, then looked away. "It is Allah's will," he replied, his voice soft but firm. "We must accept it." I wanted to shake her, ask if she felt the same fear, the same loneliness that I carried. But I saw the truth in her eyes. She was surviving, just like me, and surviving, in that house, meant silence. The women in the neighborhood were no different. One morning, I walked over to Fatima's house, my cheek still sore from the last slap Khalid had given me. As I sat with her drinking tea, she was playing with a stray cat in the courtyard. I hadn't planned on telling her anything, but the words escaped me. "He beats me," she said, her voice trembling. "And he says he can divorce me." Fatima's eyes softened, but her words were harsh. "Men are like that, Amina," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "My husband was like that too, until I learned to please him. Pray for patience. Allah will see your struggle." Patience. The word was an invisible chain, binding me to a life of fear and pain. I wanted to scream that I didn't want patience, that I wanted freedom, that I wanted security, but I just nodded, my lips pressed together. I walked home with Noir, his small hand clutched in mine, his warmth the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Prayer was my only refuge, but even that was starting to change. I laid out my prayer mat in the corner of the room, facing Mecca, my forehead touching the worn fabric as I whispered my pleas. "Please, Allah, make him kind again," I begged, my voice breaking. "Protect Noir. Protect me." But the words weighed like stones, unmoving and unanswered. Why did Allah allow me to suffer like this? Why was my suffering a test, while Khalid's cruelty went unpunished? The Quran said to obey and endure, but my heart was exhausted from enduring so much. I looked at Noir, her curls bouncing as she played, and wondered what kind of God would allow her mother to live in such fear. My faith, which had once been a comfort, was beginning to turn into doubt, a storm brewing deep within my soul. I tried to push these thoughts away, because questioning Allah was a sin, and I was already drowning in guilt. Noir was my anchor, the reason I kept breathing. I held her, her warm little body against mine, and told her stories about stars, about a world where girls could be anything. "You will be strong, my love," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "You will be free." But the words sounded empty, like lies. How could I promise her freedom when I myself was trapped? How could I protect her when I couldn't protect myself? I watched her sleep, her chest rising and falling slowly, feeling a love so strong it scared me. She was my light, but also my greatest vulnerability. If Khalid divorced me, he would take Noir with him. That fear cut through my chest like a knife, twisting with every harsh word, every scream, every raised hand. The house had become a battlefield, not just between him and me, but within myself. I struggled to be the wife they expected, obedient, silent, patient, but my heart screamed for something different, for something more. I saw myself reflected in the kitchen window, my eyes dull, my face lined, older than my 18 years. Who was I becoming? A woman trapped by fear, praying to a God who didn't seem to hear, loving a daughter who could be ripped from her arms at any moment. The spark of defiance that had ignited in me at 14, that spark that had flared when I had been forced to marry, was still there. It grew with every injury, with every threat, a flame that refused to go out. I didn't know how to fight, or how to run, but I felt that fire burning inside me. One night, after Khaled slapped me for speaking too loudly, I sat on the living room floor with Noir in my lap. The house was quiet, the call to prayer fading into the distance. I touched my cheek, still stinging, and looked at my daughter's peaceful face. "I will find a way," I whispered to her, barely audible. "For you, I will find a way." I didn't know what that path would be, or if it even existed, but the spark grew, fueled by the love I felt for Noir, the anger I harbored toward Khaled, and the doubts about a faith that seemed to justify all my pain. For now, I was still his wife, still bound by the obligation of obedience, still enclosed in a cage made of fear. But the storm in my chest was growing, and one day, it would set me free. At 25, I was a shadow of the girl who had dreamed of stars. 7 years of marriage to Khaled had destroyed me, my heart scarred by his fists, my spirit crushed by the presence of Ila, his second wife, and the constant threat of divorce. Not even my daughter, now 4 years old, was a light strong enough to save me alone. Her laughter was a fragile thread that held me together, keeping me from falling apart completely. Our home in that dusty Saudi Arabian city was a prison. The cold concrete walls, the barred windows, everything reminded me of my place, obedient, silent, invisible. The call to prayer still echoed 5 times a day, but my prayers to Allah were like whispers into the void, unanswered, unaccepted, hopeless. I was drowning in doubts, questioning a faith that seemed to only justify my suffering. It was then that Miriam appeared. She was a Christian maid from the Philippines who brought with her a breath of hope, a small, dangerous book called the Bible that would change everything. It was a calm morning, the kind where the heat seemed to weigh down on the house like a heavy hand. Khaled was in the shop, Ila had gone out to visit her family, and Noir was running around the yard, trying to catch a butterfly with a twig. I scrubbed the kitchen floor, my knees aching, my hands raw from all the soap. The bruises on my arm, from Khaled's tight grip 2 nights ago, were hidden beneath my long sleeves, but they throbbed with every movement. The pain no longer frightened me, but the hollowness in my chest, that was new, the feeling that I was simply disappearing. It was then that Miriam arrived. Khaled had hired her to help with the housework now that Ila was pregnant and needed rest. Miriam was small, with dark eyes and a gentle smile. Her hair tied back under a simple scarf, she spoke softly, with a clear Arabic accent. But there was something else about her, a calmness, a gentleness, a peace that I couldn't explain. Miriam worked silently, sweeping the living room with steady, unhurried movements. I watched her from the kitchen, curious about this stranger who was now a part of my home. She was different from the other maids we had had, who kept their heads down and spoke only when spoken to. Miriam hummed as she worked, a soft, light melody, like a breeze entering the stifling house. When Noir came running in, his hands dirty from the yard, Miriam knelt down, wiped my daughter's hands with a cloth, and laughed as Noir laughed. It was as if a light had flashed through my chest, a mixture of gratitude and envy. I wanted to be like that free, that fearless. "You're good with her," he said, his voice hesitant. Miriam looked at me, smiling warmly. "Children are a gift," she replied. "Your daughter is beautiful, like her mother." His words took me by surprise. "Beautiful?" I murmured, almost in disbelief. I haven't felt beautiful in years, not since Khaled's eyes stopped seeing me. I thanked him quietly and went back to my work, my heart racing with something I couldn't name. In the weeks that followed, Miriam became a quiet, constant presence in our lives. She cleaned, cooked, and played with Noir. Her kindness was an oasis in the cold of the house. I began to talk to her. At first, brief exchanges about the weather, the market, Noir's favorite toys, but there was a depth to Miriam, a quiet strength that I didn't yet understand. One day, when Khaled and Ila were out, I found Miriam in the laundry room, folding clothes, her humming filling the muggy air. I was exhausted, my cheeks still sore from Khaled's last slap, and I sat on a stool near her, watching. "How can you stay so calm?" I asked, my voice breaking. She paused, her hands still, and looked at me with eyes that seemed to see straight into my soul. "I have faith," he said softly. "It sustains me." Franzi shook his head, confused. "Faith in Allah?" I asked. Miriam hesitated, then shook her head. "In Jesus," he whispered, so low I could barely hear him. Jesus. The name sent a shiver through me. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or a longing. I knew Christians from hearing the Imam call them misguided. Their religion was forbidden in our land. Owning a Bible was a crime. Apostasy was a sin punishable by death. But Miriam's words didn't sound like sin. They sounded like a lifeline. "What's it like?" I asked, my voice shaking. She glanced at the door suspiciously, then took a small, worn book from her bag, plainly covered but heavy with secrets. "This is my Bible," he said, almost in a whisper. "She speaks of a God who loves us, who sees us as equals, who forgives." My heart raced. I knew I should stop, hide the book, never speak of it again. But I didn't. I wanted to know more. I needed to know more. That night, when Khaled and Ila were asleep, I found Miriam in the laundry room, the only place we could talk without fear. She handed me the Bible. The pages of the Bible were delicate, almost as if they could fall apart just by touching them. Miriam handed me the book with a calm smile and said, "Read this." She opened to a page marked with a ribbon, John 3:16. "It's about God's love," she explained. With shaking hands, I hid the book under my abaya, my heart pounding. In my room, with Noor already asleep beside me, I turned on a small lamp and opened the book. The words were strange and new to me, but they touched something deep inside me. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." Love, not duty, not punishment, not fear. Love. I read that passage again, my tears falling onto the page, blurring the ink. Could there be a God who loved me like that? Not just as a wife, not just as a mother, but as Amina? The idea was dangerous, forbidden, but to my parched soul it was like crystal clear water. Miriam and I began meeting in secret, late at night, when the house was silent. She would read to me from the Bible in a quiet voice, telling me stories of Jesus, a man who healed the sick, spoke to women as equals, forgave sinners. I listened, torn between fear and a hope I couldn't yet name. "In Christianity," she told me one night, "you are not just a wife to obey. You are a daughter of God, worthy of love." Her words were like a song that soothed the wounds left by Khaled's hands, by the harsh words he had used against me. But the fear was always there, a constant shadow. If Khaled found out, if anyone knew, I could be arrested, beaten, even killed. Apostasy was a crime here, and the religious police showed no mercy. Still, I couldn't stop. The Bible became the light in my darkness. I hid it under my mattress and read it when the house was quiet, unaware of how much was changing. One day, Noor asked me, her eyes wide, as I braided her hair, "Mommy, why are you smiling?" I didn't know I was smiling until I heard those words. I smiled and said, "Because I love you." But it was more than love. It was the whisper of a new faith, a God who saw me, who didn't demand silence. I wanted to share everything with Miriam, about Khaled's slap that still burned on my cheek, about the constant threat of divorce that kept me awake at night, about how Isla made me feel invisible. But I was afraid of being found out, but also afraid of admitting how broken I was. Miriam seemed to understand. When I was lost, she would gently hold my hand and say, "Jesus sees your pain, Amina. He is with you." Those words were both a shock and a comfort. What if I really believed? What if I left the faith I had known all my life behind? The danger grew. One afternoon, Khaled arrived earlier than expected. He found Miriam and me whispering in the kitchen. His eyes narrowed, his voice hard. "What are you talking about?" My heart sank. The Bible hidden in my room seemed to burn in my mind, a secret too heavy to bear. I swallowed my fear and answered, almost whispering. Khaled looked at me, then at Miriam, and left without another word, but the fear remained. a cold weight in my chest. I knew we had to be careful, but I couldn't stop. The Bible became my lifeline. Every word was a promise of something better, of a life where I wasn't just Khaled's wife, a vessel for his anger, an invisible shadow in that house. The women in the neighborhood began to notice the change in me. At the market, Fatima pulled me aside, her eyes looking deep inside me. "You've been so quiet, Amina," she said softly. "Is everything okay?" I wanted so badly to open up, to tell her about the Bible, about Jesus, about the hope that kept me alive. But I could see the doubt in her eyes, the way she looked at my hands, as if searching for some sign of rebellion. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She nodded, but I could feel her gaze following me as I walked away. Noor's small hand in mine was my only comfort. The city seemed to shrink, its walls closing in around me, eyes watching at every corner. The call to prayer, which had once brought me peace, now sounded like a warning. Allah was watching, and my doubts were a sin to be punished. Noor was my anchor. Her innocence reminded me why I had to keep going. I watched her smile as she played in the playground, and I imagined a different world, a world where she could be free, where she didn't have to fear a husband's hard hand or a faith that would silence her. But that world seemed so far away, a dream as far away as the stars I used to wish for as a child. At night, I would hold her tightly, her little body snuggled against mine, while I read the Bible in secret, the light from the lamp casting flickering shadows on the bedroom walls. "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Jesus spoke in Matthew 11:28. I didn't know what rest was, but I longed for it. From the bottom of my soul, I wanted it so much that the pain squeezed my chest. The spark of defiance that had been burning inside me since I was 14, that had only grown with every slap, every threat, was now a living flame, fueled by Miriam's words, by the promises of the Bible. I wasn't ready to act yet. The fear was too great. The risks weighed down like mountains. But I could feel the flame growing inside me, a silent rebellion that whispered, "You are more than a wife, more than a victim." I looked at Noor, her eyes shining with trust, and I promised myself that I would find a way for her, for us. The Bible was my secret, and my hope, but also my danger. I was on the edge of the abyss, one step away from falling or flying. For now, I was still Khaled's wife, trapped in a cage of fear and obedience. But the whisper of hope grew louder and louder, and I knew that one day he would lead me to freedom. I was 25 years old, and that hope, the one that Miriam's Bible had ignited in me, was both my salvation and my risk. For months I hid the book under my mattress. Its thin pages were the secret that kept me alive, despite Khaled's slaps, Ila's suffocating presence, and the crushing weight of my life in that dusty Saudi city. Not even Noor, at 4 years old and with her clear laugh, could be my only light. She was what kept my heart from breaking completely. But the concrete walls of our house, with its barred windows and heavy silence, seemed to close in more and more. The call to prayer continued to echo 5 times a day, a constant reminder of the world I was trapped in. My prayers to Allah began to mix with questions, doubts, and the gentle words of Jesus, promising love and rest. I found myself hanging on the edge of an abyss, torn between fear and faith, until the night Khaled discovered the Bible, and everything fell apart. My silence, my fear, my entire world. This is the story of how I reached my limit, how I found the courage to run away, and risked everything for a chance at freedom. That day began like any other. The heavy heat pressed down on the house like a silent warning. Khaled was in his shop. Isla was resting in her room, her belly already large from pregnancy. Noor was playing in the yard, drawing shapes in the dirt with a twig. I was in the kitchen, chopping onions. The strong smell stung my eyes, but I barely noticed. Miriam was cleaning the living room, her soft singing filling the tense silence around us. My mind was elsewhere, caught up in the words from the Bible hidden under the mattress, running through my head like a river. "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." I clung to those words. Their promise of love and equality was a light in my darkness, but the fear, oh, it was always there, a shadow that followed my every step. If Khaled found the book, if anyone found out I was reading about Jesus, I could lose everything. My home, my daughter, my life. Apostasy was a crime in our town, punishable by prison, or worse. The religious police were always watching. I had been careful, so careful. Miriam and I would only see each other at night, in the laundry room, whispering about Jesus and his teachings. She told stories of a God who saw women as equals, who forgave sinners, who loved without conditions. Each word fueled the flame of defiance that grew within me, year after year, in the wounds of Khalid's slaps, in the shadow of Ila, in the constant threat of divorce. That morning, though, something was wrong. The air felt too heavy, the silence too unsettling. I should have sensed danger coming, but blind hope and the weariness of fear left me vulnerable. Khalid arrived earlier than usual. His footsteps were heavy and his voice was rough as he called out to Ila. I heard her soft laugh as she ran toward him, and my heart sank with the familiar ache of feeling invisible. I continued chopping the onions, my hands steady despite the knot in my stomach. Suddenly, Noor came running in, her hands dirty and her smile radiant. "Mommy, look." She held up a star-shaped twig. I knelt down to hug her, my chest full of love. But before I could say anything, Khalid's voice cut through the air, cruel as a blade. "Amina," he shouted. I stood up, drying my hands on my abaya, and walked into the living room, feeling a cold grip on my heart. Khalid stood near the bedroom door, his face full of anger, holding something in his hands. My heart stopped. It was the Bible, the worn cover unmistakable, the pages swinging in his closed hands. "What is this?" he roared, his voice echoing off the walls of the house. My knees buckled. I held Noor tightly, pulling her behind me. "Khalid, I started to speak, but fear swallowed me. He stepped forward, the Bible raised like a weapon. "You are a kafir!" he shouted, using the word for unbeliever as a deadly insult. "You bring this filth into my house!" Before I could react, his hand moved quickly, and pain exploded across my cheek. I stumbled, trying to protect Noor, who was whimpering and clinging to my leg. Maryam stood in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. Ila appeared in the doorway, her hand resting on her stomach, her face pale. "Answer me!" Khalid shouted, gripping my arm tightly, his fingers digging into the bruises he had left earlier. "Where did you get that?" Panic was choking me, my mind spinning. I couldn't betray Maryam. I couldn't let her face his wrath, or worse, the religious police. "I found it," I lied, my voice shaking. "At the market. I was just curious." He narrowed his eyes, searching my face for a lie. Liar. With a hiss of rage, he threw the Bible to the floor. The pages scattered like broken wings around him. He raised his hand again, and I braced myself for the blow. But Noor's scream stopped him. "Mommy," she cried, grabbing my abaya with her tiny hands. Khalid froze, his fist still in the air, his chest heaving. "You're a disgrace," he said, his voice low and cold as ice. "I should report you to the Mutawa. They'd lock you up, take Noor from you." The threat cut deeper than any slap. I held Noor tightly, my tears falling into her soft hair. "Please," I whispered, "don't take her." He took a step back, his eyes filled with disgust. "Stay in this room until I decide what to do," he ordered, pointing to our room. "If I try anything, I will say the words, talak, talak, talak." The specter of divorce hung in the air, a storm about to destroy me. He slammed the door and locked it from the outside. I felt my body collapse to the floor, sobbing, holding Noor. The Bible pages scattered around were a cruel reminder of that hope that brought us here. I was more trapped than ever, but something inside me had changed. The fear was still there, yes, but the flame of defiance burned brighter than ever. I couldn't stay there. Not for me, not for anything. That night, as the house fell silent, I sat on the floor, Noor sleeping beside me. My face was wet with tears, my thoughts racing. The lock on the door felt like a chain, but my mind was already searching for freedom. I thought of Maryam, her gentle voice, the stories of Jesus. I thought of the women in the marketplace, cast out and humiliated, their lives stolen by a man's harsh words. I thought of Noor, growing up in a world that would try to crush her spirit, just as it had mine. I couldn't allow it. I needed to leave. I needed to find a way out, no matter what the cost. The words of the Bible echoed in my mind. The truth will set you free. I didn't know if it was true, but I wanted to believe. I needed to believe. I waited until the call to prayer, when Khalid would be at the mosque. I crept to the door, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. His arrogance, thinking I wouldn't dare to challenge him. I gathered Noor's clothes, some of mine, and put them in a small bag. I gathered the scattered pages of the Bible, tucking them into my abaya. my hope, my courage, my rebellion. I walked into the laundry room, where Miriam was waiting for me, her face pale but firm. "You need to go," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "There's a group that helps women like you. I've contacted them. They'll take you to safety." She thrust a piece of paper into my hand, her trembling fingers holding tightly to the phone number and address. "Be careful, Amina. Jesus is with you." I wanted to hug her, to thank her for the light she had given me, but there was no time. I picked up Noor, still half asleep, and went out the back door. The cool desert air touched my skin. The city was beginning to wake, and the streets filled with people hurrying about. I pulled my niqab over my face, hiding the fear that burned inside me. Noor clung to my hand, her small, powerful trust giving me strength. We boarded a bus, the paper with the address in my pocket, a fragile lifeline, a thread of hope. Every noise made me jump. The bus engine, the unfamiliar voices, the distant sound of a siren. The fear was suffocating, not only of Khaled, but of the religious police, the mutawas, who might arrest me for apostasy, for running away from my husband. The punishment was severe: prison, flogging, or worse. But I looked at Noor, her eyes shining with curiosity, and I knew there was no other choice. I was doing this for her, for the life she deserved. The safe haven was a small apartment in a nearby town, hidden behind an inconspicuous door. A woman named Hannah greeted us with a kind but serious face. "You're safe here," he said, leading us inside. The room was simple: a mattress on the floor, a single window covered by a curtain. Noor curled up beside me, exhausted, and I held her close, tears streaming silently down my face. I was free, but not really. I was a fugitive, a woman who dared to read a forbidden book, to dream of a different God, to run away from a man who possessed her. Fear still followed me, a constant shadow, but with it was hope. The crumpled Bible pages in my bag were a reminder. I was more than Khaled's wife, more than a victim. I was Amina, fighting for my daughter, for myself, for a life where love wasn't a prison. The days in the safe house were calm, filled with waiting and planning. Hannah told her about a network that helped women escape to other countries, where they could start over. Crossing borders was dangerous. Hiding from the authorities was a struggle, but it was possible. I thought of my mother, my sisters, the life I was leaving behind. I thought of the stars I used to whisper my dreams to, now replaced by a new light, a faith that saw me as worthy. I didn't know what was in store for me. I didn't know if I would survive the journey. But holding Noor, feeling her warmth against my chest, I felt the flame of defiance that still burned brightly within me. I had reached my limit, and instead of giving up, I was running toward freedom, toward a God who loved me, toward a life where no one would dream of fear. For now, I still ran, afraid, uncertain, but the whisper of hope was now a scream, and he pushed me forward. I'm 30 now. The girl who once whispered her dreams to the stars is just a memory, a shadow of the woman I've become. 5 years ago, I fled Khaled's home in that dusty Saudi Arabian city, clutching my daughter Noor and a bag of clothes, the scattered pages of a forbidden Bible clutched to my heart. I left behind a life of chains, child marriage at 14, the pain of polygamy, Khaled's fists, and the constant fear of divorce. I left behind a faith that justified my pain, a God who seemed to watch but never responded. Now, in a small apartment in a distant desert country, I am free. I'm Amina, a Christian, a mother, a survivor. The call to prayer no longer echoes through my days, replaced by the soft ringing of church bells and the laughter of Noor, who is 9 years old and dreams of being a doctor. This is the story of my rebirth, of finding light after darkness, of carrying scars but choosing hope. It's also the story of how I share my voice to empower women who are still trapped in the same cages I escaped. The journey so far has not been easy. After fleeing Khaled's house, I spent weeks in a cramped apartment, a safe house hidden in a nearby town. Every noise, the creak of a door, the hum of a car, made my heart race, and I was sure that Khaled or the religious police, the Mutawa, were coming for me. Apostasy was a crime in Saudi Arabia, punishable by imprisonment or even death. Running away from my husband made me a fugitive, but Noor's little hand in mine, her unwavering trust, was what kept me going, forward. The clandestine network that helped me, led by women like Hannah, organized my escape across the borders, a journey made of whispered instructions, false documents, and sleepless nights. I held Noor, her warmth my anchor. When we crossed into a new country, a place where the air felt lighter, where I could breathe without fear, I knew I was truly beginning. We settled in a small town in Europe, in a country whose name I didn't even know growing up. The apartment is simple. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a window that lets in sunlight I never knew I needed. The first time I left the house without the niqab, the wind in my face was a gift. Noor ran ahead, her curls bouncing, her laughter freer than mine had ever been in Saudi Arabia. She goes to school now, with her backpack full of books, her eyes shining with dreams. "I want to be a doctor, Mom," she says, her voice confident, and my heart overflows with pride and pain. Pride because she believes she can be anything. Pain because I know the price of those dreams, the cost I paid to give them to her. A year after we arrived, I was baptized in a small church, a white building with stained glass windows that cast rainbows onto the floor. The pastor, a kindly man with gray hair, poured water over my head, and I felt it. Rebirth, as the Bible promised. "You are a new creation in Christ," he said, quoting 2 Corinthians 5:17. And I cried, not out of fear, but out of joy. The cold water washed away the weight of the past, the shame of being a child bride, a second wife, a battered woman. I thought of Miriam, the Filipino maid who gave me the Bible, who showed me a God of love. I wish I could thank her, tell her she saved me, but I don't know where she is. If she's safe, if she still whispers hope to other women like me, I pray for her every day. Her name is part of my new faith. Christianity is my home now, a faith that sees me as a child of God, not a possession to be controlled. In Saudi Arabia, I was taught that my role was to obey, serve, and accept pain as the will of Allah. The words of the Quran: men are responsible for women. A husband can discipline his wife. A man can marry because the chains that bound me were mine. Jesus' words are different. Love one another as I have loved you. John 13:34. In church, I sit alongside men and women, equal in the eyes of God, and sing hymns that lift my spirit. The congregation is my family. Your warm smiles, your gentle hands as they hug me. They don't know my whole story, but they know that I am a refugee, a single mother, a woman who fled the darkness. They call me brave, but I don't feel brave. I feel broken, rebuilt by faith and love by Noor. The scars are still there, etched into my heart and body. I wake up sometimes, my dreams filled with Khalid's voice, his raised hand, the threat of divorce, divorce, divorce. I see the scattered pages of the Bible. I hear the screams of no as he locked us in the room. I remember the terror of running, the fear that he would find us. Accept a no, leave me with nothing. The bruises on my arms have disappeared, but the ones on my soul remain. I look in the mirror and see a woman over 30 years old. Her eyes carry stories she can't forget. I think of my mother, my sisters left behind in that deserted city. I called my mother once, from a payphone in the hideout, my voice shaking. "Come back, Amina," she said, her tone thick with fear. "You are bringing shame on us." I hung up, heartbroken, knowing I had lost them too. They don't know where I am, and it's safer that way. But loss is a wound that never heals. Not even my healing is my reason to carry on. She is growing up, her questions sharp and curious. "Why don't we wear veils?" "No more, Mom?" he asked one day, his pencil stopping over his homework. I knelt down beside her, my hand over hers, and said, "Because here we can be ourselves." She nodded, but I know she doesn't understand. Not completely. She doesn't remember Khaled's anger, the locked doors, the fear that suffocated us. I'm happy about it, but I'm also scared. I want her to know enough to be strong, but not so much that she carries my pain. I tell her stories of Jesus, of love and forgiveness, and she listens, eyes wide. "Does Jesus love everyone?" she asks, and I nod, my throat tight. "Everyone, my light, especially you." Now I work cleaning houses like Miriam did, my hands rough with soap and hard work. It's not the teaching job I dreamed of when I was 14, but it's honest and keeps us fed. The women I work for are kind. Their homes are filled with light and laughter. They don't know my past, but they see my smile, hear my broken English, and call me a hard worker. I save every penny, dreaming of a future where Noor can go to college, where she can be a doctor. She wants to be. Sometimes I sit by the window, watching the sunset, and think of the stars I used to whisper to. They're still there, but I don't need them anymore. I have a new light, a new faith, a new life. However, the past is never far away. I hear stories on the news. I read articles online about women in Saudi Arabia trapped in marriages like mine. Child brides married at 12 or 14. Their dreams stolen before they even grow up. Wives in polygamous homes, competing for love, their hearts breaking in silence. Women beaten for speaking out, divorced with a word, left to beg or worse. I think of the verses in the Quran that justified my pain. Surah 434, allowing discipline. Surah 43, allowing 4 wives. Tetalak that gave men the power to destroy lives. I think of the women in the market, their kind but resigned eyes, telling me to be patient, to endure. I was once one of them, believing that suffering was my duty, that Allah wanted me to obey a man who hurt me. But now I know that no loving God would want his daughters to live in fear. That's why I'm sharing my story, writing it down in a notebook I keep next to my bed. The pages are filled with the truth of my heart. I want to give a voice to these women, those who are still trapped, still praying to a God who seems silent. I want them to know that they are not alone, that there is a way out, even if it's dangerous, even if it costs everything. Now I volunteer at a refugee center, helping women like me, women who have fled abuse, oppression, fear. I hear their stories. I hold their hands. I tell them they are worthy of love. Some are Muslim, some are Christian, some are neither. But I see myself in their eyes. The pain, the hope, the courage it takes to run. I talk about Jesus, not to convert them, but to share the love that saved me. You are enough, I say. Words I wish someone had said to me when I was 14, 16, 25. The church is my refuge, a place where I feel complete. Last Sunday I stood up during worship, my voice shaking, and shared a piece of my story. The congregation listened, their faces soft with compassion. I was a child bride, I said, my hands shaking. I was beaten, replaced, threatened. I continued. But I found a God who loves me, who gave me the strength to run. I'm here for my daughter, for myself, for the women who are still in chains. When I finished, they clapped softly, and I cried, not out of shame, but out of freedom. I am no longer invisible. I am no longer silent. I am Amina, and I am free. But freedom is not the absence of pain. It is the courage to live with it, to choose hope over despair. I carry my scars, the memories of Khalid's fists, the sound of his voice, the fear of losing the no. I carry the loss of my family, my home, my past. But I also carry the light, the love of a God who sees me, the laughter of a daughter who dreams, the strength of a woman who survived. I look at Noor, her pencil crossing out her homework, your bright future, and I know it was worth it. Every risk, every tear, every step through the desert towards this new life. I pray for the women I left behind, for the girls who still don't know they can run. I pray that you find your own whisper of hope, your own light of freedom. As I write this, the sun is setting outside, painting the sky in shades of gold. Noor is asleep, her book spread out around her, a toy stethoscope resting on her chest. I open my Bible, its pages new but familiar, and read the verse that guided me. The truth will set you free. John 8:32. I am free, not because my pain is gone, but because I chose to fight for it. I chose Noor. I chose faith. I chose myself. And in that choice, I found the light I had been looking for since I was a girl, whispering to the stars,